Well, hello there. We should have done the reading rainbow introduction. Hello there. I'm Phil McCaffrey. I'm very busy reading all the science you need to know to ace the ACT science section by did we change wait, I was just talking to Sammy. Did we change by Dr. Robinsatty EDD? We should have done the reading rainbow. Amateur
I
mistake.
didn't change it yet. I will.
All right,
I will.
I was talking to her today, so we'll get that one updated back to you as a present for your graduation. I'll pay. Sammy's on the payroll, by the way.
Oh, wonderful.
So if you need anything, Sammy's on the payroll full time. So this is a little tiny book written by my special guest today, Dr. Robin Satty. Before she was Dr. Robin Satty, and it's all the science you need to know to ace the ACT science section. Even though today is not the ACT, we've been forgetting to show this all week. But in the link on the YouTube link, I will get the Amazon link. It is really a fantastic read. Literally sit down and go through one read because it is 20 pages and it's all the science you need to know. So this is one of the things you go. I hate to ask, have you looked lately on Amazon? What's the going rate on Amazon?
$8.99.
$8.99. Okay, that's what I told you to charge. Did you?
It's a steal for a test prep book.
Did you take my advice? That's I told you. Make it under $9. All right, we'll send this out to everybody. All right, what do we have today, Dr. Satty?
Well, today we're talking about SAT science, which actually this would help you a lot with. But you might be thinking to yourself, SAT science? There's no SAT science. In fact, I decided to take the SAT because there's no science section. Well, joke's on you. There's science everywhere.
Well,
Even though
I always say the SAT wanted to be the ACT and have a science section. So one of the things that they're doing is they've replaced state tests. So they had to have a STEM score for the state biology test, which you're completely familiar with. But go ahead.
Yep. So what they've done is they're trying to emulate the ACT. It's two companies competing with each other. They just keep trying to copy each other to earn those dollars. They have a science reading passage in the reading section. And there are also a handful of science questions scattered throughout the math section and even some in the writing section. Although largely it's going to be that one reading passage.
And then there'll be other STEM-like questions where you're doing charts and graphs, the data representation of data. There's a lot of tables and graphs and long questions in the math. So you might even have an example of one of those today.
In fact, I do.
Hey, what's on your office wall there? What's behind you? What's that a graph of?
It's an architectural diagram of an onion bagel with cream cheese and lox.
It's an architectural diagram of an onion bagel with cream cheese and lox. Do you like onion bagels with cream cheese and lox?
I do, but I actually got that from my parents. They had it hanging in their kitchen for most of my childhood.
Oh, really? And so you stole it?
It was gifted to me.
It was gifted to you. So, actually, somebody gave me a gift of the original patent for the number 2 pencil,
Ooh.
for the wooden pencil. So, yeah, 2 counselors gave it to me for the opening of the 3-hour prep office for our anniversary or Christmas or something. So it was really nice. So I got something cool and geeky upstairs. Okay, let's go. What do you got next for me?
All right. SAT and ACT science. Tonight we're going to focus on the SATs.
Don't forget to share your screen. Oop.
There we go. So SAT science, as I mentioned before, is one reading passage and then a couple of questions scattered throughout the other sections. Your big strategy for the science in the reading section is mostly similar to your reading strategies, with some differences. that you'll also see on the ACT Science, which is they're trying to scare you with these big, scary science words, the technical words, the Latin names of species, things that aren't actually that important. They just throw them at you and throw many at you in rapid succession in hopes of intimidating you so much you throw your hands up in the air, slam the paper on the ground, and walk out in frustration, or something like that. So all you need to do is just define those big, scary science words.
And they're usually, wouldn't you say there's usually some context to define them?
Yes. Define them using the context for the words around them. It is almost always the case where you can find the definition immediately next to the first occurrence of a certain word. And then, of course, when you see table and graph questions, you answer them by reading the table and graph. I know that sounds like duh. It is duh, and those questions are often exceedingly easy. If you thought the ACT Science graph questions were easy, wait till you see these. So first, how do you know that you're looking at the science reading passage? It's usually pretty obvious because they're usually talking about something that is obviously science. It is not literature, it's not a poem or a story or a fiction narrative. Hints here in the blurb, always read the blurb. It sets you up and can answer several questions for you. It's talking about honeybee colony collapse disorder.
What do you mean by the blurb? What does that mean? Some people may not know what the blurb is.
The blurb is my favorite part of the SAT reading section.
Of course it is.
And it's the small text at the very top of the passage that you think is just telling you the author's name and title because they're legally required to. It's actually a lot more than that. They're often going to briefly describe the genre, sometimes the historical significance of a particular passage, and sometimes they give you details. They actually give you a definition in this one. So there are always some goodies hidden in it. You never want to skip them. It sets you up nicely.
It does set you up nicely. You know, the one thing that I'm disappointed is the blurb used to be italicized. On the previous SATs, they were italicized. Now it is a different font, and it looks like Arial font versus like some type of Times New Roman or Cambrian typewriter font. But this is an Arial font, so there's there's a font change.
Yes, it's the main passage is a serif font, which means the letters have those little nubbins at the end of them.
Wait, is that what that means?
Yes. A serif is the little line, so sans serif, and then like...
Wait, with and without little lines on the word? Oh my god, I just learned something. That was that was totally badass.
The lines are supposed to help your eyes track across the page to read more easily. It's why the passage itself has a serif font. The New York Times actually, as far as I know, don't quote me on this, but please Google it, developed Times New Roman and popularized that appearance of font because it's easiest to read, although some font experts will argue that it's in fact the ugliest font they've ever seen.
I think it's great.
I've got to go to the dictionary here. A serif is a slight projection finishing off a stroke of a letter in certain typefaces. Is it a slight projection? I never knew what a serif was.
The blurb is in a sans serif font. So if you ever see sans serif, sans comes from the French for without.
It comes from the Latin. Boom, yeah. We're like, whoa, this is awesome. Thanks, Robin. That was worth the whole night. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So your blurb is going to be in the sans serif font, which until you pointed out, I didn't notice it wasn't italicized. Anyway, honeybee colony collapse disorder. It's mentioning a species, the honeybee, is possibly caused by. You'll notice that scientists are the only people that say things like possibly because they never overstate their hand. That's why scientists are the best people. Dietary pyrethrum deficiency which sounds like some crazy thing.
Did you just say scientists are the best people instead of scientists are very good people? And a lot.
Actually, if I wanted to sound like a scientist, I would say that
Scientists are possibly the best people.
Possibly.
Yeah, scientists are possibly the best people. We're actually going to see that in a question. That's actually going to help us answer one of the questions later.
That scientists are the best people?
No, that scientists tend to use words like possibly so they don't overstate their hand. In the question, the word is may. You'll see, it's a pretty obvious one that helps you actually.
Excellent.
All right, so anyway, science passage. You also get a definition here. Colony collapse disorder is characterized by the disappearance of adult worker bees from hives. You don't need to know what colony collapse disorder is to answer the questions, but it's helpful to have context. Worker bees are dying, and we want to figure out why and how to fix it. That sets up your passage right there. Okay, so that's how you know that this is a science passage. You also see, and here's where your italics show up, your two-word italicized Latin name of a species, also a good sign that it is science. All right, so now we're going to actually read and actually answer questions instead of just talking about fonts, which I could do all night long. We'll have to do another series about that. So remember, we're going to not be scared of the big scary words, and we're going to define them. So if you start reading, honeybees are hosts to the pathogenic large ectoparasitic mite Varroa destructor. Isn't that a great name? If you were to have I don't know, if you were to be a bad guy, I think I would.
No, that's my rapper name.
Yes, your rapper name.
Varroa Destructor.
But anyway, you have a lot of big scary words that are describing mite. So I'm just going to get rid of them because they're big and scary. We don't need them. And it gives us this Latin name. When you see a Latin name, you don't need to know how to pronounce it. You don't need to know what it means. All you need to know is what species it's referring to. Here, Varroa mites. I don't want to have to pronounce it every time we see it, so I'm just going to say V mites. Often you can take the first letter of the Latin name and sort of keep that in your head as a definition of it, so you keep the Latin name straight without getting confused by the big words. So honeybees are hosts to V mites. Great, a lot easier. These mites feed on bee hemolymph. Have not seen the word hemolymph before reading this passage. Fortunately, it defines it for me right there in the passage. So every time I see the word hemolymph, I know it means blood. We actually don't see it again, but there are a lot of cases where you have a big scary word that is defined right there for you. So that's the basic strategy. Let's look at some example questions. First, what type of questions are you going to see for the science passage? Most of them are going to be your regular reading questions. The big picture stuff. What was this passage about? What was this whole paragraph about? What was the main idea? Tone. What was the tone of the passage? The author used this word and this word in hopes of creating, which tone for the passage. And then details. What happened in this paragraph? Asking the what happened, the plot points, even though it's not a fictional narrative or a nonfiction narrative, I guess. What happened, the details, things that you can go right back into the passage and pull out, things that you should be familiar with from the regular reading passages. You're more likely to see definitions and vocab and context questions in science passages. You're more likely to see argumentation questions, asking about viewpoint evidence, which evidence would weaken the author's viewpoint if, or the author believes what, the author would agree with what, the author would disagree with what. You will have some questions where it is helpful to have some scientific inquiry background. That's things like the scientific method. Inquiry is a big buzzword nowadays that gets schools money for STEM things. But we're talking about the scientific method.
Okay, send me any helpful hints on how to get money out of schools. Because they're not returning phone calls during quarantine, so...
All bets are off during quarantine.
You're telling me.
And then, of course, there's tables and graphs, sometimes figures or diagrams, or visual representations of data.
Ooh, I love that one.
Um,
Gotta get my notes out.
that will have questions about those. So here's an example of a definition word. Definition question. As used in line 35, postulate most nearly means. Here's line 35. Always go to the line it tells you. Always read a little bit above and a little bit below.
A little bit above, a little below.
Tells you that the immunocompromised or deficient bees may be further weakened when commercially produced insecticides are introduced into their hives. So weak bees get worse when insecticides are introduced into their hives by beekeepers in an effort to fight mite infestation. Because we want to get rid of these mites, we further postulate that the proper dosage necessary to prevent mite infestation may be better left to the bees. So they say a bad thing happens, and then they're saying we postulate that the proper dosage to prevent mite infestation. So they're making a recommendation based on what they've previously noticed. They're making a suggestion. If you look at the answer choices, they're not making an unfounded assumption because they're connecting it to previous ideas. It's founded. It's also not an assumption because they say may, because scientists tend to not overstate their hand. Like we talked about before, it's why scientists are awesome. Choice B, put forth an idea or claim. Sounds pretty good.
Why scientists may be awesome.
Yeah, why scientists may be awesome, but that's...
Why scientists may be awesome. You know what? I'm open to new evidence at any moment. C, question a belief or theory. They're not stating a belief or theory that they're then questioning. And then choice D is a good example of an answer choice that is too strongly worded. Very often they'll give you something that is mostly right, except for one word, or mostly right but too strong or too weak or too broad or too narrow. It helps to identify those wrong answer choices so you become more familiar with the types of answer choices you'll see. So conclude based on firm evidence. If you were to take out the word firm, it's actually a reasonable answer choice, but firm makes it too strong. The word may means that they're not concluding based on firm evidence. So B is our best answer here. Argumentation questions, things like what did they think or what would they have thought? An unstated assumption made by the authors about clover. What you do here is you'd skim the passage for mentions of clover. That's your key word here. And we would find clover, and it says this hypothesis can be tested by a trial. So we're doing an experiment where a small number of commercial honeybee colonies are offered a number of pyrethrum producing plants. I had never seen the word pyrethrum before this reading and will probably never again. I'm just going to say pee plants. I told myself I was going to do that without giggling. I was not successful.
It was a good giggle. I like pee plants.
The hypothesis can best be tested by a trial wherein a small number of commercial honeybee colonies are offered a number of pee plants, as well as typical bee food source such as clover. As well as are your keywords here. The scientists are offering pea plants as well as clover, implying that we're comparing clover and pea plants, implying that clover does not produce pyrethrum. Clover is not a pea plant. Answer choice A. This is an example of a question that relates to scientific inquiry, where an understanding of science will help you answer the question better. You don't need it. You're not necessarily going to get it wrong if you have some good reading comprehension skills to make up for it, but it makes it a lot easier if you're familiar with your scientific method and the vocabulary associated with it. It doesn't need to be incredibly advanced. You don't need a degree in statistics to be able to understand the experiments that they're drawing conclusions from, but just some basic vocabulary. A hypothesis is an educated guess based on previous information. An experiment tests a hypothesis. A control group is the thing that gets none or the normal amount of something that we can compare to the experimental group. We draw conclusions based on evidence. We then share our results with other scientists so that it can be.
Would that be on page 13 of all the science you need to know?
I believe it would be a lot of those key definitions, as well as some other science content that you won't need to know for this test, but will certainly help you out. You probably need to know some of it at least for the ACT. So in this particular question, in line 42, the authors state that a certain hypothesis can best be tested by a trial. Based on a passage, which of the following is the hypothesis the authors suggest be tested? Again, you can understand what's going on if you don't know what hypothesis and trial mean in their relation to each other, but it's a lot easier if you know that a hypothesis is a guess. It's often a guess that predicts an input's effect on an output, and the trial or experiment will test that hypothesis. So this is the same paragraph as we saw in the previous question. So we've read it before. This hypothesis can best be tested by a trial wherein a small number of commercial honeybee colonies are offered a number of PP plants as well as typical food source such as clover, while controls are only offered the clover. So what we have here is we have some bees being offered your PP plants and clover, and some of your bees are only being offered clover. So the thing that we're testing that's different, or the independent variable, is whether the bees are given PP plants. The mites are then introduced to each hive with a note made as to the choice of bees and the effects of the mite parasites on the experimental colonies versus control colonies. So we're looking at the effects of the mite parasites. That's our output, or our dependent variable. Again, you don't need to know those things, but it's helpful for figuring out your hypothesis. So your hypothesis is that your input, PP plants, has an impact on your output, parasites. Looking at our answer choices, the closest answer is honeybee diet that includes pyrethrums results in honeybee colonies that are more resistant to mite infestations. Here's your input, PP, and there's your output, mite infestations. There are a couple of answers here that are answer choices that are unrelated. There are a couple of answer choices that are too specific, too broad, or generally reasonable but contain little details that are wrong. The first one talks about virus, bacterium, or fungus, which are great science-sounding words, but not related to this answer. Choice B talks about beekeepers. It's actually talking about an application of this experiment, something they might be able to do once they've drawn their conclusions, but it's too specific, it's gone too far. And then choice D talks about humans. We're not talking about humans at all here, just bees and PP plants.
So if a problem, if an answer choice has additional information like fungus, and it's not actually in the passage, it's wrong. It has to be in the passage. So in this case, infestation is not a word that's in the passage, but its synonym is, which is the effect of a parasite. So you have to watch your words and their definition. So this is a pretty big, huge vocabulary test. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. So what's tricky here is that the phrase virus, bacterium, or a fungus is actually in the passage. It's in that first paragraph, but it's not related to the specific story. It's just a list of examples. So if you are scared by big science words, then you might see those words and pick the answer that has those words.
Well, I always say if it's in the passage, then it must have agreement. So it's not in this part where the trial is being talked about, because they give you a quotation, and it's in a separate part, so it can't have agreement with the trial. So the key word I would underline is trial in the question, and I would find that word. One of the things that I do, which is a little weird, is that I make trial a word picture, and I don't read for trial. I look for the shape of the word trial, because it's quoted, so it's got to be there, and I got to read around trial. So I've taught myself just to look for words as pictures, like hieroglyphs, instead of reading and get involved.
That's what trial looks like.
Yep. I look at the shape of the word. That's what I'm trying to do with my hands. I love words with O's in them because they're easier to find.
Yes, or words with double letters. M's are great because they're particularly wide.
That's why the M dash and the N dash
is actually really useful in standardized test prep.
Yes, absolutely. I look for word pictures, and I read backwards for them so that I don't get involved.
Yep, so you don't get bogged down in the content.
Bogged down. Ooh, you said bogged 2 days in a row. There was a bog. You know, I was going to say, people know what a bog is because they've watched Lord of the Rings. We're in a bog. If you're science nerds, you've watched. I mean, I'm talking to students about things, and I'm referencing Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, and students are like, "No, don't get it." I'm like, "You haven't watched Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings?" And the kids are like, "No." I'm like, "Missing out."
Uncultured swine.
Uncultured swine if you don't have Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter in your playlist. All right, what's next, Robin?
Well, they're both in my playlist, but not with the verb watch. Read. Actually, not Lord of the Rings. The books we're not going to go there. I love the Harry Potter books.
The Lord of the Rings books, to be a nerd and switch, are and I've said this to Damien recently, are the greatest audio books you will ever listen to.
Okay, do they sing for you?
They do.
I could see that. You know what? I love The Hobbit, and I tried to read the first Lord of the Rings book 2 or 3 separate times and could not get through it.
Do you have Audible?
I do.
I'm gonna send you.
I don't have a current membership right now. I'll get it from the library.
I'm gonna send you a gift certificate for an Audible as a present for doing this show, because the actor who does the voices does them in different characters. His name is Robert Inglis, and he just tears it up because I skip over all the songs, but he actually sings them as an elf or a dwarf. And he just does a phenomenal job. It's well worth the 13-hour investment of your life.
That's not that unusual for an audiobook. I think Game of Thrones was 44 hours.
Game of Thrones is a book that I've tried to read, like you've tried to read, and I didn't have the chart of all the families. And every time I went back to read it, I forgot who was whom. So I couldn't.
I was warned about that particular problem going in, and so I kept that in mind, and as a result really enjoyed reading the first one. I audiobooked the second one, which is really hard because if you're not really paying close attention, you can't tell when they change chapters and change stories. You don't know. It's confusing. Good books, just quite a bit of a time investment. All right, let's take a look at the easiest question you're going to see all night. Possibly the easiest question you're going to see ever. The makers of the SAT, the College Board, seem to think that graphs and charts and tables are so difficult in and of themselves, that they can only ask you really, really easy questions about them. So this particular question, based on the data in the table, which of the 4 pathogens infected the highest percentage of honeybee colonies without colony collapse disorder? So let's find colonies without colony collapse disorder. Let's find highest percentage. Done.
I love that. I love how the column heading, which you've told me, column title, excuse me. I always say information row, but column title. Notice the column title is always the question, the data is always the answer. In this case, they went over to what the data represented, but it still had the data as the answer. It was still highest. It was still 81. So that top row there, colonies without colony collapse disorder, is the question. That's how it always works. So they're just purely imitating the ACT.
All right, so now let's take a look at the science-related questions you're likely to see on other sections. We have one writing example, one math example, and then it's my bedtime.
One writing and one math and bedtime.
So writing, occasionally you'll get a passage that is specifically science-related. This particular passage was about apples and a way that they can be treated to help them ripen faster, and basically you don't want to know what goes into the things you buy at the supermarket. Too much information. This particular question has a graph on it and asks you a question about the graph. The graph is easy. Reading the graph is easy. The tricky part is interpreting the words around it. So it says, which choice offers an accurate interpretation of the data in the graph? They're really just asking you for a general interpretation. If you have to read back in the passage, this is the section of the passage that it asks you about. If you're taking practice SATs from the PDFs offered on the College Board website, the numbering in the writing sections are off. All sorts of weird. So this says 10. It actually should say 32. There was one that was like an ampersand. Just ignore the numbering in the actual writing section and just connect it to the question. You'll see that on their PDFs.
Actually, that 10 relates to another question. They wouldn't give you the 32 on this section, so I'll teach you what that is. That's related to another question.
Really?
Yep. Yeah, they never do that. They never put the number of the question on there. It's part of where should this go, or what do they mean to do it, and move it around. That's another question. So it's not related to the graph question.
Interesting. I didn't know that, because the first part of the sentence right here is actually really important for answering the question. However, when Empire apples are treated with 1 MCP, and that tells you that when we're looking at the graph, we're only looking at the 1 MCP part. Doesn't matter what that means, what went on the rest of the passage. For now, we're looking at 1 MCP, which means the dark lines. This one right here, and this one right here. The as-is answer is the flesh turns brown when the apples are first exposed to open air, but not in other conditions. Well, we see here that there's some browning in both different conditions. Again, it doesn't even matter what the conditions are. Browning in both of them. So we need an answer that shows there's browning in both of them. Choice B says roughly half their flesh turns brown, regardless of whether the apples are first stored in the open air. That's what we see. Both of them are roughly the same in both of the different scenarios. Again, the details don't matter. It's the general overall trends. Something important to note here is that you're assuming roughly half is here maybe 46-ish% and here maybe 52-ish%. Even though the answers aren't exact, it still fits roughly half. You never want to get so bogged down.
Ooh, nice. Third time.
Of the graph details. You want to look at the overall trends, the general idea. And especially in science, when you use real data, you're likely to see the numbers are not perfect. Things don't work out perfectly in the real world. So in a situation like this, the numbers don't match exactly, but they still fit the definition of roughly half. Okay, one more example, and this is science in the math section. Similarly, they feel like if they're throwing something sciencey at you, the actual math involved is going to be pretty straightforward and pretty easy. Anyone who's looked at the SAT in the last 5 or so years will have noticed that they're really excited about these long-winded paragraphs.
Oh, yeah.
That's like the big thing right now. Common Core is all about it. They think that it makes it feel applicable to students, so you understand why the math is important and makes it more interesting. Debatable.
They're trying to sell this to states, so their rationale is that it is a real world scenario that they've given you context for. So this is real math, and it truly is actually real math.
It aligns pretty well with Common Core. Now, I won't argue.
Gee, I wonder why, because David Coleman, the president of the College Board who writes the SAT, wrote the Common Core. I wonder if they're related to each other and he set himself up for a multi-billion-dollar job. Well,
so I won't argue, about the importance of questions that are related to students' lives and allowing students to relate to the content. That's really important, and there's some research to back up, that idea. It keeps students engaged. I will argue that maybe the SAT questions are not actually that related to what students see in their lives, and as a result, may not actually be that engaging. Mostly, they're just long-winded and distracting. The hard part is picking out the information you need. So in this question, what is the weight in newtons of an object on Mercury with a mass of 90 kilograms? Mercury, 90 kilograms. Something important to note is that when it says weight in newtons, on both the SAT and ACT, almost all the time, maybe 90% of the time, 95% of the time, possibly more, when they give you the units, it's just a formality. They're just stating the units that you see elsewhere, and you can ignore that completely. Maybe 1 in 20 times you see that, you'll have to convert between seconds or minutes or something like that. But in general, do maybe a brief skim to make sure that the units are consistent. Newtons, great, and now just ignore where it says in newtons. So we want to find the weight on Mercury with a mass of 90 kilograms.
I just had this discussion with a student that we were talking about it yesterday, is that this is the only question I've ever seen that has actual weight versus mass in it, where you have to put the acceleration due to gravity of the planet to get the weight. It's interesting because that's why spacemen can bounce on the moon. There isn't as much acceleration due to gravity, but that's a whole nother nerdy topic. But this is the only time.
It's really interesting. It's actually a challenging concept to learn about the difference between weight and mass. But you don't need to know it for this. You just need to know how to skim a passage and find key information. In fact, all you need to know here is you find the word weight, formula W equals mg, where W is the weight of the object, m is the mass, g is the acceleration due to gravity. So our W is what we're looking for. Our m, mass, 90 kilograms. And our g, acceleration due to gravity, measured in meters per second squared. Acceleration due to gravity measured in meters per second squared. We're on Mercury. Mercury 3.6. And I'm not even going to pull out my calculator. I'm going to say 90 times 3
I'm going to
is 270.
Yep, I'm going to say the same thing, and the only number close to 270 is 324. The answer has to be D.
Exactly.
Nice.
You don't even need the exact answer. Obviously, if you're in a situation where you can use your calculator and you have extra time, use your calculator to be double sure. But you always want to have an idea in your head of what you're expecting on your calculator.
This is actually off the calculator section, so I do know that one as a fact, because they would never give this level of math, 90 times 3.6, on the non-calculator section. That's too hard of math for a non-calculator question.
that's good to know. But even so, I think it's always a good idea to have just some sort of estimate in your head
Yep.
of what you get out of the calculator, because you don't want to get an answer wrong because your fat finger hit the wrong button.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Fat finger and calculator. Estimate 9 times 3 is 270. There's 101. That would be 90 times something very close to 1. I noticed that the 25.
Close.
Yeah, the other answers aren't even close.
Yep. All right, those are my examples. Thank you. If you have any questions for me, please email me, robinsatty@gmail.com, or if you just want to talk about science or talk about standardized test prep. If you'd like some more information and you'd like to learn about ACT science in more detail, although not too much detail, it's a short book, it's dense, it has everything you need in just 20 pages. Take a look at my book on Amazon, link in the YouTube comments. And if not, thank you and have a good night.
Well, have a good night. We'll talk soon, Dr. Satty. Thanks so much. I'm Phil McCaffrey. This is 8:30 Prep, and this was She Blinded Me with Science Week because she is the Robin Satty. That's why I came up with it. Thank you so much, Dr. Robin Satty. robinsatty@gmail.com. If you want a science nerd out about standardized tests, I know no one who knows as much about science and standardized tests as Dr. Robin Satty. Please contact her. I'll be more than happy to not be your tutor, and she can be your tutor because she is an awesome tutor. Thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to talking to you soon. Go back to bed. You have to not go back to bed. Go to bed because you've got little ones to take care of. Take care and have a good night.